chapter 6 through whatever I can get through. I'm going to try it as a live stream. So if you could throw me a chat and let me know if coming through loud and clear, any lag. It seems like I've got a pretty good connection. First off, I wanted to thank you guys that helped. There's 5 or 6 of you that helped. I would shout you all out. Tiffany Vinch, Will Stein, Jeff. There's a few of you guys that helped. And so we've got the hotel room paid all the way through Saturday night. And then there's been a couple of people that had offered. So thank you guys very much. And we get to sleep in. And I'm going to do some work. So thank you. Who was that just said that? Said that it's all good. Appreciate that. And I'll just go ahead and start reading. And the reason I'm doing this real quick, I'll just let you know, is because my phone only lets me record 32 minutes and 6 seconds at a time. And sometimes if I go 2 or 3 chapters, it's longer than that. So I'm just going to go ahead and read it. I hope you enjoy. I got a real good kick out of this book. Always loved Kurt Vonnegut, Jr. or whatever, right? But anyway, so here we go. So this is God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater, chapter 6. Excuse me. So, nature's little danger signals. Senator Rosewater said to Sylvia and McAllister and Mouchari darkly, "How many did I miss? All of them, I guess." "Don't blame yourself," said McAllister. "If a man has but one child," said the senator, "and the family is famous for producing unusual, strong-willed individuals, what standards can the man have for deciding whether or not his child is a nut? Don't blame yourself. I've spent my life demanding that people blame themselves for their misfortunes. Well, you've made exceptions. Damn few. Include yourself among the damn few. That's where you belong. I often think that Elliot would not have turned out as he has if there hadn't been all that whoop-de-doo about his being mascot of the fire department when he was a child. God, how they spoiled him. Let him ride on the seat of the #1 pumper. Let him ring the bell. Taught him how to make the truck backfire by turning the ignition off and on. Laughed like crazy when he blew the muffler off. They all smelled of booze, of course, too." He nodded and blinked. "Booze and fire engines, a happy childhood regained. I don't know. I just don't know. Whenever we went out there, I told him it was home, but I never thought he'd be dumb enough to believe it. ... I blame myself," said the senator. "Good for you," said McAllister. "And while you're at it, be sure to hold yourself responsible for everything that happened to Elliot during World War II. It's your fault, without a doubt. All those firemen were in that smoke-filled building." McAllister was speaking of the proximate cause of Elliot's nervous breakdown near the end of the war. The smoke-filled building was a clarinet factory in Bavaria. It was supposedly infested by a hedgehog of SS troops. Elliot led a platoon from his company in an assault on the building. His customary weapon was a Thompson submachine gun, but he went in with a rifle and a fixed bayonet this time because of the danger of shooting one of his own men in the smoke. He had never stuck a bayonet into anybody before, not in years of carnage. He pitched a grenade into a window. When it went off, Captain Rosewater went through the window himself, found himself standing in a sea of very still smoke whose undulating surface was level with his eyes. He tilted his head back to keep his nose in air. He could hear Germans, but he couldn't see them. He took a step forward, stumbled over one body, fell over another one. They were Germans who had been killed by his grenade. He stood up, found himself face to face with a helmeted German in a gas mask. Elliot, like the good soldier he was, jammed his knee into the man's groin, drove his bayonet into his throat, withdrew the bayonet, and smashed the man's jaw with his rifle butt. And then Elliot heard an American sergeant yelling somewhere off on his left. The visibility was apparently a lot better over there, for the sergeant was yelling, "Cease fire! Hold your fire, you guys! Jesus Christ, these aren't soldiers, they're firemen. And it was true. Elliot had killed 3 unarmed firemen. They were ordinary villagers engaged in the brave. What, baby? Careful.
That was like.
No, but you can't move this. I got the
No,
phone rest right.
I was listening.
No, I know. Just don't pull this. Can you watch that?
Oh,
Be
I'm
careful.
sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. It was true. Elliot had killed 3 unarmed firemen.
It's awful.
They were ordinary villagers engaged in the brave and uncontroversial business of trying to keep a building from combining with oxygen. When the medics got the masks off, the 3 Elliot had killed, they proved to be 2 old men and a boy. The boy was the one Elliot had bayoneted. He didn't look more than 14. Elliot seemed reasonably well for about 10 minutes after that, and then he calmly laid down in front of a moving truck. The truck stopped in time, but the wheels were touching Captain Rosewater. When some of his horrified men picked him up, they found out that Elliot was stiff, so rigid that they might have carried him by his hair and his heels. He stayed like that for 12 hours and would not speak or eat, so they shipped him back to Gay Paris. ... What did he seem like there in Paris? The senator wanted to know. Did he seem sane enough to you then, huh? That's how I happened to meet him. I don't understand. Father's string quartet played for some of the mental patients in one of the American hospitals, and Father got talking to Elliot, and Father thought Elliot was the sanest American he had ever met. When Elliot was well enough to leave, Father had him to dinner. I remember Father's introduction. I want you all to meet the only American who has so far noticed the Second World War. What did he say that was so sane, huh? It was the impression that he made, really, more than the particular things he said. I remember how my father described him. He said, "This young captain I'm bringing home, he despises art." Can you imagine? Despises it. And yet, he does it in such a way that I can't help loving him for it. What he's saying, I think, is that art has failed him, which I must admit is a very fair thing for a man who has bayoneted a 14-year-old boy in the line of duty to say. ... I loved Elliot on sight. Is there some other word you could use? Well, then what? Then love. What better word is there? It was a perfectly good word until Elliot got hold of it. It's spoiled for me now. Elliot did to the word love what the Russians did to the word democracy. If Elliot is going to love everybody, no matter what they are, no matter what they do, then those of us who love particular people for particular reasons had better find ourselves a new word. He looked up at an oil painting of his deceased wife. For instance, I loved her more than I loved our garbage collector, which makes me guilty of the most unspeakable of modern crimes, discrimination. ... Sylvia smiled wanly. For want of a better word, I could go on using the old one, just for tonight. On your lips it still has meaning. I loved him on sight in Paris, and I love him when I think of him now. You must have realized pretty early on in the game that you had a nut on your hands. Well, there was the drinking. There's the heart of the problem right there. And there was that awful business with Arthur Garvey Ohm. Ohm was a poet Elliot had given $10,000 to when the foundation was still in New York. That poor Arthur told Elliot he wanted to be free to tell the truth, regardless of the economic consequences, and Elliot wrote him a tremendous check right then and there. It was at a cocktail party, said Sylvia. I remember Arthur Godfrey was there, and Robert Frost, and Salvador Dali, and a lot of others too. You go tell the truth, by God. It's about time somebody did, Elliot said to him. And if you need any more money to tell more truth, you just come back to me. Poor Arthur wandered about the party in a daze, showing people the check. asking them if it could possibly be real. They all told him it was a perfectly wonderful check, and he came back to Elliot, made sure again that the check wasn't a joke. And then, almost hysterically, he begged Elliot to tell him what he should write about. "The truth," said Elliot. "You're my patron, and I thought that as my patron you might—" "I'm not your patron. I'm a fellow American who's paying you money to find out what the truth is. That's a very different sort of thing." "Right, right," said Arthur. "That's the way it should be. That's the way I want it. I just thought that there was maybe some special subject that you pick the subject and be good and be fearless about it." "Right." And before he knew what he was doing, poor Arthur saluted, and I don't think he'd even been in the Army or Navy or anything. And he left Elliot, but he went around the party again, asking everybody what sorts of things Elliot was interested in. He finally came back to tell Elliot that he had once been a migratory fruit picker, and that he wanted to write a cycle of poems about how miserable the fruit picking business was, and how miserable the fruit pickers were. Elliot threw himself up to his full height, looked down on Arthur, his eyes blazing, and he said so that everybody could hear, "Sir, do you realize that the Rosewaters are the founders and the majority stockholders in the United Fruit Company?" "That wasn't true," said the senator. "Well, of course it wasn't," said Sylvia. "Did the foundation have any United Fruit stock whatsoever at that time?" the senator asked McAllister. "Oh, 5,000 shares, maybe." "Nothing. Nothing," McAllister agreed. Poor Arthur turned crimson, slunk away, came back again, and asked Elliot very humbly who his favorite poet was. "I don't know his name," said Elliot, "and I wish I did, because it's the only poem I ever thought enough to commit to heart." "Where did you see it?" "It was written on a wall, Mr. Ulm, of the men's room of a beer joint on the border between Rosewater and Brown counties in Indiana, the Log Cabin Inn." "Oh, this is weird," said the senator. "The Log Cabin Inn must have burned down, oh God, in 1934 or so. How weird that Elliot should remember it." "Was he ever in it?" McAllister asked. Once, just once now that I think back," said the senator. "It was a dreadful robber's roost, and we would never have stopped there if the car hadn't have boiled over. Elliot must have been 10, maybe 12, and he probably did use the men's room. And he probably did see something written on the wall, something he never forgot." He nodded. "How weird, just how weird." "What was the poem?" said McAllister. Sylvia apologized to the two old men for having to be coarse, and then she recited the 2 lines Elliot had recited loudly for Ulm. "We don't piss in your ashtrays, so please don't throw cigarettes in our urinals. ... dot, dot, dot." "The poor poet fled in tears," said Sylvia. "For months after that I was in terror of opening small packages, lest one of them contain the ear of Arthur Garvey Ulm. ... dot, dot, dot." "Hates the arts," said McAllister. He clucked. "He's a poet himself," said Sylvia. "Well, that's news to me," said the senator. "I never saw any of it. He used to write me poems sometimes. He probably is happiest when writing on the walls of public lavatories. I often wondered who did it. Now I know. It's my own poetic son." "Does he write on lavatory walls?" McAllister asked. "I heard that he did," said Sylvia. "It was innocent. It wasn't obscene. During the New York days, people told me that Elliot was writing the same message in men's rooms all over town." "Do you remember what it was?" "Yes. If you would be unloved and forgotten, be reasonable. As far as I know, that was original with him. ... dot, dot, dot." At that moment, Elliot was trying to read himself back to sleep with the manuscript of a novel by none other than Arthur Garvey Ulm. The name of the book was Get with child a mandrake root, a line from a poem by John Donne. The dedication read, "For Elliot Rosewater, my compassionate turquoise," and under that was another quotation from Donne. "A compassionate turquoise which doth tell, by looking pale the wearer is not well." A covering letter from Ulm explained that the book was going to be published by Palindrome Press in time for Christmas, and was going to be a joint selection, along with The Cradle of Erotica, a major book club. "You have no doubt forgotten me, compassionate turquoise," the letter said in part. "The Arthur Garvey Ulm you knew was a man well worth forgetting. What a coward he was, and what a fool he was to think he was a poet. And what a long, long time it took him to understand exactly how generous and kind your cruelty was, how much you managed to tell me about what was wrong with me and what I should do about it, and how few words you used. Here then, 14 years later, are 800 pages of prose by me. They could not have been created by me without you, and I don't mean your money. Money is shit, which is one of the things I've tried to say in the book. I mean, your insistence that the truth be told about this sick, sick society of ours, and that the words for the telling could be found on the walls of restrooms." Eliot couldn't remember who Arthur Garvey Ulm was, and so was even further from knowing what advice he might have given the man. The clues Ulm offered were so nebulous. Eliot was pleased that he had given someone useful advice, was thrilled even, when Ulm declared, "Let them shoot me, let them hang me, but I have told the truth. The gnashing of teeth of the Pharisees, Madison Avenue phonies, and Philistines will be music to my ears. With your divine assistance, I have let the gin of truth about them out of the bottle, and they will never, 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 ever get it back in. Pow." Eliot began to read avidly the truths which Elm expected to get killed for telling. Chapter 1. I twisted her arm until she opened her legs, and she gave me a little scream, half joy, half pain. How do you figure a woman, huh? As I rammed the old Avenger home. Eliot found himself possessed of an erection. "Oh, for heaven's sakes," he said to his procreative organ, "how irrelevant can you be? ... If only there had been a child," said the senator again, and then the density of his regret was penetrated by this thought, that it was cruel of him to speak so to the woman who had failed to bear the magic child. "Excuse an old fool, Sylvia. I can understand why you might thank God there is no child." Sylvia, returning from her cry in the bathroom, experimented with small gestures, all indicating that she would have loved such a baby, but that she might have pitied it too. "I would never thank God for a thing like that." "May I ask you a highly personal question?" "It's what life does all the time." "Do you think it's remotely possible that he will ever reproduce?" "I haven't seen him for 3 years." "I'm asking you to make an extrapolation." "I can only tell you," she said, "that towards the end of our marriage, love-making was something less than a mania with us both. He was once a sweet fanatic for love-making, but not for making children of his own." The senator clucked ruefully. "If only I had taken proper care of my child." He winced. "I paid a call to the psychoanalyst Eliot used to go to in New York. Finally got around to it last year. I seem to get around to everything about Eliot 20 years too late. The thing is, I've never been able to get it through my head that such a splendid animal could ever go so much to hell." Yeah. Mouchari concealed his hunger for clinical details of Eliot's ailment, waited tensely for someone to urge the senator to continue. No one did, so Mouchari exposed himself. "And what did the doctor say, huh?" The senator, suspecting nothing, resumed his tale. "These people never want to talk about what you want to talk about. It's always something else. When he found out who I was, he didn't want to talk about Elliot. He wanted to talk about the Rosewater Law. The Rosewater Law was what the senator thought of as his legislative masterpiece. It made the publication or possession of obscene materials a federal offense, carrying penalties up to $50,000 and 10 years in prison without hope of parole. It was a masterpiece because it actually defined obscenity. Obscenity, it said, is any picture or phonograph record or any written matter calling attention to reproductive organs, bodily discharges, or bodily hair. The psychoanalyst, the senator complained, wanted to know about my childhood. He wanted to go into my feelings about bodily hair. The senator shuddered. I asked him to kindly get off the subject, that my revulsions were shared, so far as I knew, by all decent men. He pointed to McAllister, simply wanting to point at someone, anyone. There's your key to pornography. Other people say, oh, how can you recognize it? How can you tell it from art and all that? I've written the keys into law. The difference between pornography and art is bodily hair. He flushed, apologized abjectly to Sylvia. I beg your pardon, my dear. Mouchari had to prod him again, and the doctor didn't say anything about Elliot. The damn doctor said Elliot never told him a damn thing but well-known facts from history, almost all of them related to the oppression of oddballs or the poor. He said any diagnosis he made of Elliot's disease would have to be irresponsible speculation. As a deeply worried father, I told the doctor, well, go ahead and guess as much as you want to about my son. I won't hold you responsible. I'd be most grateful if you'd say anything, true or not, because I ran out of ideas about my boy, responsible or irresponsible, true or not, years ago. Stick your stainless steel spoon in this unhappy old man's brains, Doc, I told him, and stir. He said to me, before I tell you what my irresponsible thoughts are, I'll have to discuss sexual perversion some. I intend to involve Elliot in the discussion, so if an involvement of that sort would affect you violently, let's have our talk come to an end right here. Carry on, I said. I'm an old futz, and the theory is that an old futz can't be hurt very much by anything anybody says. I've never believed it before, but I'll try to believe it now. Very well, the doctor said. Let's assume that a healthy young man is supposed to be sexually aroused by an attractive woman, not his mother or sister. If he's aroused by other things, another man, say, or an umbrella, or the ostrich boa of the Empress Josephine, or a sheep, or a corpse, or his mother, or a stolen garter belt, he is what we call a pervert. I replied that I had always known such people were about, but that I'd never thought much about them because, well, there didn't seem to be much to think about them. Good, he said. That's a calm, reasonable response. Senator Rosewater, then I'm frank to say, surprises me. Let us hasten on to the admission that every case of perversion is essentially a case of crossed wires. Mother Nature and society order a man to take his sex to such and such a place and to do thus and so with it. Because of the crossed wires, the unhappy man enthusiastically goes straight to the wrong place, proudly, vigorously does some hideously inappropriate thing, and he can count himself lucky if he's simply crippled for life by a police force rather than killed by a mob. I began to feel terror for the first time in my years, said the senator, and I told the doctor so. Good, he said again. The most exquisite pleasure of the medicine comes from nudging a layman in the direction of terror when bringing him back to safety again. Elliot certainly has his wires crossed, but the inappropriate thing to which the short circuit has caused him to bring his sexual energies isn't necessarily such a very bad thing. Well, what is it? I cried, thinking in spite of myself that Elliot stealing a woman's underwear, or Elliot snipping off locks of hair on subways, of Elliot as a peeping Tom. The senator from Indiana shuddered. Tell me, doctor. Tell me the worst. Elliot is bringing his sexual energies to what end? To utopia, he said. Frustration made Norman Mouchari sneeze. End of chapter 6. Dang, chapter 7's a straight beast. Like 30 pages. All right, we'll do it. We'll do chapter 7 and then it's a wrap for real. I got a toothache so bad, hurting all over. Fractured heel bone. Tooth bone is connected to the heel bone for real. How? Elliot's eyelids were growing heavy as he read, "Get with child a mandrake root." He was rumpling about in it at random, hoping to find by chance the words that were supposed to make Pharisees gnash their teeth. He found one place where a judge was damned for never having given his wife an orgasm, and another where an advertising executive in charge of a soap account got drunk, locked his apartment doors, and put on his mother's wedding dress. Elliot frowned, tried to think that sort of thing was fair to middling Pharisee baiting, failed to think so. He read now the account of executive fiancée's seduction of her father's chauffeur. Suggestively, she bit off the breast pocket buttons of his uniform jacket. Elliot Rosewater fell fast asleep. The telephone rang 3 times. "This is the Rosewater Foundation. How can we help you?" "Mr. Rosewater," said a fretful man, "you don't know me." "Did someone tell you that mattered?" "I'm nothing, Mr. Rosewater. I'm worse than nothing." "Then God made a pretty bad mistake, didn't he?" "Well, he sure did when he made me." "Maybe you brought your complaint to the right place." "What kind of a place is it, anyway?" "How did you happen to hear of us?" "Well, there's this big black and yellow sticker in the phone booth that says, 'Don't kill yourself, call the Rosewater Foundation,' and it's got your number." Such stickers were in every phone booth in the county, and in the back windows of the cars and trucks of most of the volunteer firemen, too. You know what somebody's written right under that in pencil? No. It says, "Elliot Rosewater is a saint. He'll give you love and money. If you'd rather have the best piece of tail in southern Indiana, call Melissa," and then it's got her number. "You're a stranger in these parts?" "I'm a stranger in all parts. But what are you anyway? Some kind of religion?" "Two-seed in the Spirit Predestinarian Baptist." "What?" "Well, that's what I generally say when people insist I must have a religion. There happens to be such a sect, and I'm sure it's a good one. Foot washing is practiced, and the ministers draw no pay. I wash my feet, and I draw no pay." "I don't get it," said the caller. Just a way of trying to put you at ease, to let you know that you don't have to be deadly serious with me. You don't happen to be a two-seed in the Spirit Predestinarian Baptist, do you?" "Well, Jesus, no." "There are 200 people who are, and sooner or later, I'm going to say to one of them what I've just said to you." Elliot took a drink. "I live in dread of that moment, and it's sure to come." "You sound like a drunk. It sounded like you just took a drink, too." "Be that as it may, what can we do to help you?" "Who the hell are you?" "The government." "The what?" "The government. If I'm not a church and I still want to keep people from killing themselves, I must be the government, right?" The man muttered something. "Or the community chest," said Elliot. "Is this some kind of a joke?" "Well, that's for me to know and for you to find out." "Maybe you think it's funny to put up signs about people who want to commit suicide." "Are you about to?" "And what if I was?" "Well, I wouldn't tell you the gorgeous reasons I have discovered for going on living." "Well, what would you do?" "I'd ask you to name the rock bottom price you'd charge to go on living for just one more week." There was a silence. Did you hear me? Said Elliot. I heard you. If you're not going to kill yourself, would you please hang up? There are other people who'd like to use the line. You sound so crazy. You're the one who wants to kill himself. What if I said I wouldn't live through the next week for $1 million? Well, I'd say, go ahead and die. Try 1,000. 1,000? Go ahead and die. Try 100. 100? Now you're making sense. Come on over and talk. He told him where his office was. Don't be afraid of the dogs in the front of the firehouse, he said. They only bite when the fire horn goes off. ... About the fire horn. To the best of Elliot's knowledge, it was the loudest alarm in the Western Hemisphere. It was driven by a 700 horsepower Messerschmitt engine that had a 30 horsepower electric starter. It had been the main air raid siren of Berlin during the Second World War. The Rosewater Foundation had bought it from the West German government and presented it to the town anonymously. When it arrived by flat car, the only clue as to the donor was a small tag that said simply, "Compliments of a friend." ... Elliot wrote in a cumbersome ledger he kept under his cot. It was bound in pebbled black leather, had 300 ruled pages of I rest green. He called it his Domesday book. It was in this book, from the very first day of the Foundation's operations in Rosewater, that Elliot entered the name of each client, the nature of the client's pains, and what the Foundation had done about them. The book was nearly full, and only Elliot or his estranged wife could have interpreted all that was written there. What he wrote now was the name of this suicidal man who had called him, who had come to see him, who had just departed a little sulkily, as though suspecting he had been swindled or mocked, but couldn't imagine how or why. Sherman Wesley Little, wrote Elliot. Indy SU TDM LO V2 W3K3 K2CP RF $300. Decoded, this all meant that Little was from Indianapolis, was a suicidal tool and die maker who had been laid off, a veteran of the Second World War, with a wife and 3 children, the second child suffering cerebral palsy. Elliot had awarded him a Rosewater Fellowship of $300. A prescription that was far more common than money on the Doomsday Book was AW. This represented Elliot's recommendation to people who were down in the dumps for every reason and for no reason in particular. Dear, I tell you what to do. Take an aspirin tablet and wash it down with a glass of wine. It's A&W, of course. ... Toothache. Oh man, I might have to stop here. Actually, I'm gonna stop this here. Love you guys. It's been 33 minutes and 33 seconds or whatever. Whew. Tooth is straight killing me, but so we're in the middle of chapter 7, page 107 at the ... I will pick this up again tomorrow, and I've got some other flat earth and regular content coming. Just bear with me. I'm right in the middle of a bunch of stuff, and I'm going to sleep in tomorrow. I got to get up at 5:30 a.m. for real, and I got a doctor's appointment at 1:30 p.m. Going to see orthopedic surgeon tomorrow, so wish me luck. All right, guys, love you much. See you later.